The Appalachian Mountains. You ever heard of them? Well, I'm sure you have. Almost everyone on Earth has heard of them, probably. Well, I live in them. My family holler's been our family holler since 1749. Granted, the acreage has shrunk over the years from several hundred down to the 30 we own now, but it's still ours. We were the first to claim the land, work the land, and try to carve out a new life after leaving Germany. Every so often, I'm asked if strange things happen in these dense forests. Usually this is by someone who's not from the region. Over the last couple of years, only people who have never set foot in a forest or hiked even a mile up a mountain are the ones asking. I've always thought the mountains held magic. Not just because Granny told me stories about it. No. It's not something a person can tell you and then you go, "Oh, yeah, now I see." The mountains are magical. It's something you have to experience personally. And yes, that means you have to get off the couch, out of that recliner, put down the phone, and actually venture into the woods. And until you do that, you'll never really understand why people like me say the Appalachians hold magic. And hold up before you go thinking I'm only talking about the storybook witches, fairies, and little people. I mean, we have those for sure, but we have so much more. And that's why I'm here today, to share a tale with all you good folks who've gathered around to hear a scary tale from the heart of one of the most mysterious mountain ranges in the world. Let me take you to a place off of Highway 81 South, in my neck of the woods. The neighborhood is called Bumpus Cove. Up the road a ways on your left, there's an old logging road. Used to be that the gate would close and locked, but if you wanted to get in there, you had to park about a mile away to get in. It's government property. I was fortunate though. My father-in-law was a logger. He picked up contracts on these mountains for the better part of 40 years. That meant he had a key to the gate. My husband helped his father on several of the contracts, and therefore, he had unlimited access to that key. And those were the days, let me tell you. I was young, fit, adventurous, and I never turned down an opportunity to run off into the woods and go exploring, just to see what I could see. I loved the heavily forested mountains through every season. I still do, but I don't go on many adventures these days. Rather, I pass on the stories of my youth to folks like you. Folks who weren't lucky enough to be surrounded by the lush green beauty of nature. And I'd like to think that some of you who live around here but aren't physically able to go into the woods might draw some spark of intrigue or enjoyment from the stories. Anyway, back to the story before I get waxing poetic about life here. Where was I? Yes, I was going to tell you about Bumpus Grove, Tennessee. I was 21, fresh-faced, bright-eyed, and energetic. This would have been around the summer of 1985. My husband was my only friend at the time, and that meant I would set off on adventures without warning, and without waiting until the weekends when he would be with me. Who had time for that? I had places to go, things to see, experiences to have. I didn't have time to wait. I'd heard all the stories about the Devil's Looking Glass and the Nolichucky River, and if you don't know them, look 'em up. Bumpus Cove is the mountain behind the Devil's Looking Glass. I had heard stories about a beautiful and serene place, high up on the mountain that, if you find it, you'd never want to leave. Some said it was enchanted by fairy magic, and I had to see it for myself. I knew there were 2 ways to get back to the approximate area, but I was much more familiar with the Bumpus Cove way, even though I had been warned that it would take much longer, and it would require me to leave one trail, walk through the forest, and hit another trail, California Trail, and that would lead me to California Creek. The place I was looking for lay just beyond the creek. California fields. Beautifully, possibly enchanted fields, right smack in the middle of all that forest. Yes, please. Who wouldn't want to see that? I drove to Bumpus Cove, parked my car in a friend's driveway, and set off with my pack and my walking stick. The temperature that late July soared into the mid-90s, so I was really looking forward to retreating into the coolness of the mountain, and I was in no hurry to come back out. The lack of rain and the blistering temperatures had dried up the ground outside the forest until it was more like cracked concrete than the usual soft dirt. It took about 20 minutes to walk to the old logging road gate, and there, I seriously considered postponing the hike. The heat bore down from above and radiated from the compacted ground below. The light breeze was hot, and I could imagine that's what the inside of a convection oven would feel like. The tales of California fields played through my mind, and won out. Ducking under the gate, I set off on the 90-minute hike. I'd planned on the hike taking closer to 2 hours, maybe a little more, because there was no way for me to judge the exact distance or the conditions of the terrain. We didn't have cell phones, GPS, hell, I didn't even carry a compass or a map of any kind, and the only weapon I possessed was a pocket knife my dad had given me when I had turned 18. Yeah, things were much different back then. Normally, when you step past the gate, the difference in temperature and atmosphere was nearly immediate. I could tell I was leaving the regular world behind before I was 3 yards from the gate. Not that day, though. I stepped off the logging road and walked along its edge just inside the tree line for a tiny bit of relief from the heat, and it didn't feel normal until I had walked for 45 minutes straight. My hair was soaked under my hat, sweat rolled off of me everywhere. My heart beat like the hoof beats of a spooked horse. But I sent up a silent prayer of thanks when I felt the first cool breeze waft over me. It was so cool that I felt its chill through the thick denim of my jeans. Standing on a little rise on the side of the dwindling, overgrown trail, I looked in the direction I was supposed to go next. The forest undergrowth was wild, untouched, and impenetrable. I walked a little farther up the trail to make sure I was at the correct spot, and sure enough, there were no other rock formations at all. Just the ones I had stood atop minutes earlier. You see, around here, we're famous for giving directions, not by maps and recorded road numbers, but by landmarks. And that's what I was following that day. The person I got my directions from told me to stand atop that little rock formation and face the back of the mountain that held the Devil's Looking Glass and walk straight toward it. There was a lot of room for error. The mountain I faced loomed huge in front of me. The man hadn't specified whether I should walk towards the left side, the right side, or aim for the middle. He just said I should reach California Trail within 30 minutes if I had gone the right way. And before you say it, I already know. One of the rules of the Appalachian Mountains is to never go off the marked trails. They're marked for a good reason. But I grew up running these mountains. My first trek into the woods was with my grandmother. I was 4. That's right, 4. I had my own little walking stick. I followed her and started learning how to follow the honeybees to find wild honey. And so, with all my experience in the woods, the rules didn't apply to me. At least, that's what I thought then. Birds sang up high in the lush canopy. Squirrels chattered and skittered around, tried to seem larger than they were as I passed them. And not too far away, a deer snorted, and a whole herd took off, scattering through the dense foliage. Smiling, I walked on, and I kept walking, taking in my surroundings, the super black soil from which all manner of leafy, flowering plants sprang, the oddly twisted willow to my right, whose drooping limbs called to me, beckoned me to sit a spell and rest in its shadow, to the way the sunlight dappled everything around me, making it all seem as though it were moving, alive in a way that forest greenery shouldn't be alive. And I paid no attention to how long I'd been walking until I was so tired that I had to rest. When I looked at my watch, I realized that I'd been walking almost an hour. That meant I'd probably missed California Trail about 30 minutes back. After resting a while, I headed back. I picked up the correct trail and laughed. Finally, I was on my way to see the enchanted place. But soon I would have a memory that could never be taken from me. And if I'd only known how dark that memory was going to be, I might have followed that trail right out of that mountain. But I didn't know. Hell, I had no clue. The worst thing I could imagine was running into a mountain lion or a bear, and so I went on my happy, bubbly, naive way and reached California Creek within a matter of minutes. I was so happy to hear that water burbling and gurgling that I ran off the trail toward it. I didn't stop at its shallow edge, only noted how crystal clear the water was, how large the flat rock formation was that reached almost to the other side, and then I plunged right in. It's not deep. At its deepest, it was just below my knees, but it was icy cold and did wonders to finish cooling me down so I could enjoy the rest of the trip. I collected rocks from all my adventures, and most of them came from little creeks. That trip was no different. In the shadow of the mesa-like rock, I bent and started gathering a handful of the prettiest rocks for my collection. I picked up rock number 3 when all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze. Something was watching me. I stood straight and started for the other shore, looking around in a way that looked as if I were merely taking in the sights and hadn't felt the malintent of whoever was watching me. But I saw nothing. In front of me and to the left lay the path of California fields. I was sure of it. On one side of the path there was a wall of crumbly rock that reached about 12 feet. It was straight up and down, and there was no way to climb it. This feature ran as far as I could see in both directions. On the other side of the path there was a flat forest for about 100 feet. At the end of that is where a mountain rose sharply from the ground, and much like the crumbling rock wall formation, there was no way to climb it quickly. The creek and whatever or whoever was watching me lay at my back. Turning to fully scan the area across the creek, I pulled my knife from my pocket and flipped it open. The feeling was so oppressive that I expected someone or a gang of someones to charge me at any minute. Looking left, right, straight to the dense forest and back to my side of the creek. Saw nothing. I heard nothing. Not even birds, I whispered. A chill swept over me and my skin shrank 2 sizes. When the forest goes silent, then you worry. It usually means a larger predator is nearby, and that could be anything from a wolf to a person to a bear or a mountain lion. The large outcropping of rock that spanned most of the creek and rose 20-some feet into the air was flat on top. I glanced up there, even though I didn't think anyone could get up there, and my heart flip-flopped painfully. My hand tightened around the handle of the knife, and my knees locked. A mountain lion lay stretched out, watching me, unmoving, relaxed. Everything that I wasn't. I'd been told what to do if I ever ran into a mountain lion. I'd been told my whole life exactly how to act and what to do to keep from being attacked, or to reduce the likelihood of an attack anyway. The only problem was that my brain kept screaming at me to run, get away, run faster than ever, and my knees wouldn't unlock for the longest time. What I had been taught my whole life finally triumphed, My knees unlocked as soon as I made up my mind on what I wanted to do, and I began to ease backward, one tiny, unthreatening, unalluring step at a time. The whole time, that big cat stared straight into my soul, daring me to trip, gasp, fall, break eye contact, or start running. Thankfully, I was able to keep a slow, steady backward motion until I was around a bend in the trail that blocked me from view. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not knowing if I was headed into something worse, getting lost, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from that cat. Several minutes of running later, when claws hadn't ripped through my back, I slowed to a pained walk, but didn't dare to stop. I wondered, why had I gone hiking alone? Why hadn't I taken at least a rifle with me? How the hell was I going to get back across that creek and out of the mountains? And with all those questions whirling through my mind, I almost missed California fields entirely. I stopped and looked out at the open space with trepidation and more than a little fear. If the cat had tracked me, even leisurely, he could pounce on me with no problem. I was too tired to run, too tired to fend off an attack. So I beheld the fields from the inside of the flat forested area. It did look magical. It also looked as if someone a long time ago had planned on calling it home one day. Planned on it, but for some reason had abandoned it after flattening the land, clearing it of all the trees and brambles, and even dug out a large rectangular spot for a big house. And my mind conjured up images of the early 1800s, maybe even the mid-1800s, as I took in the quaint lay of the land surrounded by flat forest on two sides and high mountains on the other two. It would have been a perfect place to live, with the mountains giving shelter in the winter, the fresh water of the creek not too far away. And why had it been abruptly abandoned then? It was odd. I had to force myself to stop thinking about it. I had to figure a way back out. If I took the long way to California Trail, I could walk out into another place in Unicoi and possibly hitch a ride back to my car. Seemed like a solid idea, since I refused to go back across the creek where the mountain lion might still be waiting. The disconcerting silence remained as I walked closer to the mountain. Even once I had reached the place where the mountain's base rose straight out of the earth, the silence remained. If I headed along the curvature of the base, I would pick up California Trail and creek again. If I walked far enough, I would come out to the river, but it would do no good. There was no access to the water for long stretches on that side. It was a dangerous drop to the water where jagged rocks waited for the chance to taste blood. The day traded in the short shadows of early afternoon for the longer ones of late afternoon, and I still had not picked up any sign of a trail or the creek again. I stopped and looked back. I had gone too far to walk all the way around again, and hoped to get out of the woods before dark. Unshouldering my pack, I checked for the headlamp I sometimes carried, or a small flashlight. The headlamp was there, but the batteries were gone. I probably filched them to use in the small flashlight at some point, and just never replaced them. Didn't matter though. I was going to be walking in the dark soon. Just because the sun hasn't set doesn't mean you have light in the woods. Anyone with experience will tell you that. And one of the other cardinal rules of the Appalachians is to never go into the woods between dusk and dawn. That's a rule that does apply to me and everybody who lives in the mountains. We know better. Deep in our bones, we know better. Yet there I was, with the sun sinkingly rapidly in the west, the darkness pulling in tight around me like an unwanted hug, and I was thoroughly lost to boot. The smart thing to do would have been to set up a camp for the night and try again in the morning light, but I had nothing to make camp with. I also didn't think it was a good idea to fall asleep out in the open. The mountain lion could have followed me. They will follow and track prey for miles, and I didn't feel like being turned into a kitty's caviar. For a while there was almost pitch darkness, and then the moon came out. She was only 3/4 full, but I wasn't complaining. I got moving faster. I had to come out somewhere after all. Owls hooted, possums and raccoons chittered and scurried through the underbrush, making my heart skip. I would freeze until I was sure what animal was there. Honestly, I expected each time that the big cat would swagger into view, roll his amber eyes up at me, and growl just before showing me exactly how loud I could scream as he ripped into me. As exhaustion started taking a hold of me, my legs began to cramp. Holding my breath, I would massage the knots out and listen for anything that sounded like I was close to civilization. Cars, livestock, anything. But there was nothing. After what seemed like hours, I had to sit. Every 3 or 4 steps, my calves were cramping up. I was getting nowhere like that. The sound of the river's turbulent waters drifted to me. I was confused. I knew what I was hearing was the rapids, but I shouldn't have been near them. And somehow the sound came from my left instead of my right, where the river should have been. A real panic set in as I forced my legs to carry me toward the sound of the rapids. Soon I saw the water shining blackly under the moonlight. A quick look to the right showed that I was just shy of the Devil's Looking Glass. I'd walked all day following what I thought was the base of the Looking Glass Mountain, but could not have been. I should have been miles away. A screeching laugh echoed from the direction of the Looking Glass formation. "Who's there?" I yelled over the noise of the rushing water. A faint female voice called back. "Are you lost?" She sounded older, like maybe in her 60s. It was a grandmotherly voice. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I was exhausted to my soul and hoped she was with a camping party that would allow me to shelter for the night. I headed towards the voice. "Yes, I'm lost," I yelled. "Well, come on then. Come and get something to eat, dear." I searched the darkness for light as I continued toward her voice. Every few steps I would say hello, and she would laugh. Each time the laugh was closer, so I knew I was going in the right direction. "Where are you?" I asked, not needing to yell any longer. "Right here," she whispered in my ear. I squawked indignantly and jumped backward. My foot landed on something slippery and I fell. The old woman laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, and I could just make out her shape in the darkness. She looked a little shorter than me and her back had started to curve down at the shoulders, giving her a slightly hunched appearance. Struggling to my feet, I waited for her to stop laughing. Maybe she was an old hippie out there smoking pot with her pals. Hey, where I'm from, that happens more often than you'd think. Usually the river rats, as they're known, stayed on the other side of the river where it was considered safer, but it wasn't unheard of for someone to boat across and stay a day or two. A gnarled, pale hand reached out of the darkness toward me. The fingers wiggled as if wanting me to take hold of them. She chuckled again. "Come on, the cabin's right over here." I didn't know there was a... 20 feet away, low lights bloomed to life, illuminating the windows of a small, old cabin. I let her take my hand as I stared at the cabin in disbelief. As we neared the flickering lights, her frizzy white hair seemed to jig and dance with the flickering of the old lamps. I grinned. I couldn't help it. It was just so bizarre. Was I asleep somewhere out in the woods and dreaming of the whole thing? That was the only explanation I could come up with. But, do you question reality in a dream? I wasn't sure. I wanted to go out that day and make a memory that would last a lifetime. So why not just go with it and see where it ends? See, that was my logic at that point. Years later, I could see how it might be viewed as illogical, but when the lights flickered to life in that cabin, I was sure I was dreaming. The cabin's interior was simple, plain, but clean, and the padded chairs looked comfortable. She motioned to one, told me to sit and rest while she prepared a plate of fruit and cheese for me. I didn't argue. If it was a dream or not, I felt the exhaustion flowing through me, and I was starved. Cheese and fruit sounded delicious. When she returned, I gasped as I saw her face. The wrinkles were deeper than any I'd ever seen, and her chin was twisted slightly to one side. Her eyes were milky white, and she had only one tooth. Her hooked nose did not help her frightful witch-like appearance at all. She laughed and set the plate in front of me as if she could see out of those cataract-riddled orbs that had once been eyes. The blue veins in them pulsed and moved like worms trapped under sodden cheesecloth. I shoved away from the table and stumbled towards the door. "I shouldn't have bothered you," I stammered. The smile slid from her face, and she pointed to the plate. I shook my head and I opened the door. Just then a cold wind howled past me and all the oil lamps went dark. I stepped out, temporarily blind in the darkness. The old woman's laughter trailed behind me like a living thing, pursuing me into the abyss. I fell on the slippery spot again, that time landing with the whole side of my leg in it. Scrambling to my feet, I smelled blood and rot. The kind of rot you smell where something has died. Off to my left, the sound of hoofbeats bore down on me as if I were about to be trampled. I dropped to my knees and covered my head with my arms. The wind off the creature wrapped around me like a ghostly tentacled thing, and then it was gone. The hoofbeats continued their course a few yards and stopped about where I thought the cabin stood. Breathing hard, I looked into that direction. The lights flickered on all at once again, and the silhouette of a large goat with great long horns and a rider was outlined in the open doorway. The rider stepped off the animal. He wore a coat that reached almost to his knees and a tall hat. Before entering the cabin, he removed the hat. I had to slap my hands over my mouth to remain quiet. Horns grew from his forehead and curled down at his temples. A long, smooth tail flicked to the side from under that long coat as he stepped into the house. Leaping to my feet, all my fatigue and hunger forgotten, I ran toward the sound of the water. Branches slapped at my face and neck and arms. My ankles twisted painfully on the shale rocks jutting up from the treacherous ground. But I ignored it all, and I ran. The woman's screechly laugh sought me out, twisting and turning, moving higher in the air, and then lower to the ground until it caught up with me, and it burst like a balloon over my head, raining down an ear-splitting scream. I screamed in return, and put my hands over my ears. I stumbled and fell, gashing my knee on a rock. As I was getting back to my feet, the scream faded into a silence which quickly filled with the sound of hoofbeats. The rider leaped from the animal, and the hoofbeats were replaced by heavy, fast footfalls. His snarls and grunts sent a terror through me like I had never experienced before. It was all-consuming, as the whipping of his coattails grew louder. Zigging and zagging, hitting and bouncing off trees, I ran. I ran until the forest abruptly ended, and the river was a few feet away. The man yelled no as I plunged towards the deadly water, and as my feet left the bank, claws ripped into my right calf and shredded the skin along with my jeans. My shoe was ripped off and I was falling, but not far enough out. Whoever or whatever that man had stifled my momentum, and the only thing I could do was hold my breath and squeeze my eyes shut. Now, I'm not sure what happened after that for a while. I know that I hit the rocks in the water, though. I had broken ribs, a fractured humerus, and a dislocated ankle to go with the fractured skull and the 2 broken teeth. The 4 claw marks in my leg made a spiral from the back of my knee all the way to the outside of my heel, and it required 42 stitches. While I lay there in the hospital bed full of stitches, staples, and broken bones, the doctors and the cops lectured me about being stupid by going out into the woods alone at night. They said I was lucky that a bear didn't follow me right off into the water and chow down on my broken head. After I told them my story, they said I had probably sustained some brain injury during the fall, and therefore I couldn't completely trust my memory. There was no cabin out there. There's no creepy old woman, and certainly no devil riding a goat. And my family begged me to just stop with the story before I was committed to a psychiatric facility, and none of them seemed to believe me either. But I know what I saw silhouetted in front of that cabin door, and I know it wasn't a bear. Now, it's been almost 30 years now. The details are vivid, sharp, and unchanging, just like all my scars from the incident. I've been to the safer side of the river since then, the side nearest Highway 81 South. And every time I've gone there after dark, even if it's just driving by in a car, the scars on my leg burn just like they did when they were fresh.